Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Gen Z iOS Code. If your Xcode project has a views folder with 47 files, this video is definitely for you. So it turns out most iOS apps don't fail because of features, right? They fail because the code base becomes unmaintainable. So in this video, I'll show you a clean and production ready way to organize your Xcode using clear boundaries, features, and responsibilities. All right, so let's get to the video. All right, so first things first, right? So what we're gonna do in this video is I'm gonna show you how to organize all your folders and all your files and how actually a senior developer would actually do it in order for you to have a code base that's very maintainable and everything is very organized. So whenever you do a production ready app, right, an app that's scalable, and then once the app becomes very big, since you have everything organized, everything has boundaries, everything just becomes a lot more maintainable, right? All right, so let's get to it. The first thing we're going to have is a folder called core, right? So instead of having, I've seen a lot of developers, right, have, let's say, a folder for views. So a folder will be like this square right here, and then a file will be this circle right here. So I've seen a lot of developers just have, they just have a folder called views and maybe another folder called view model, right? So in iOS development, most people use model view model, and then they combine it with like services, things, and stores and and some other stuff. So you can also use Viper, and there's it will be like a little bit different. So these all depends in the architecture you're doing, right? But just to make it general, if you're using model view model, right, just the most basic one, a lot of people just have a big folder called views, and they have like 47 files in there, right? Any single view, they just have it in there, and they will have another folder called view models, and they'll have like all the view models in there, right? So let's say that you have so for the sake of the example, we're gonna use a to-do list app, right? So so all of this stuff, I'm just gonna do as if we're building a to-do list app, right? So let's say you have, a bunch of views for like what's a to do, and then the whole view with all of them, the single to do, maybe a compact view, maybe a view to filter. So all those views, you'll have them just thrown in the views folder, right? Maybe the authentication and all the subcomponents for that. And then the same thing for the view models, right? So then you're working on a view and in a view model, and then you have to like constantly be looking for those views and view models because they get lost and then things like that. So first thing we're going to do is I have something called core. So in core, what is it that we're going to have? Well, it's going to be the core of the app, right? So what that means is, so basically views and view models are going to live inside core, right? And they're going to be together. So if your app is very small, you don't need to have subfolders. Like if it's just very simple app, right? You can have like 2 or 3, and maybe it's not as, it doesn't look as bad. But once the app grows and then you start having things, it's better if you organize it how I have it here into folders. So this is what we're going to be going through what I usually call like CDS, so core domain services architecture. And this is just for organizing how we're going to be showing all our files and folders in Xcode. So I'm going to be, just following through that, right? So inside core, what do we have in core? So let's say you have a to-do list app, right? So we're going to have an authentication, right? So let's say you go into the app, and then you have some sort of authentication where the user can sign in and sign up and register and all that. They can reset their password. Then once they go past that, they have a view, right, where they can see all the to-dos. They can create a to-do list, a to-do, and then they also have a settings view, right, that they can go to and then, do, tweak settings and things like that. So let's say this is our app, right? So what we're going to do is, since we're probably going to have different, views and view models or the different components, it's not really scalable, right? If you just put all the views inside views and then all the view models inside view models, right? So what we're going to do when I get rid of these, we're inside core, we're going to organize folders depending on sections of our app, right? So, you have to be able to decouple all the functionality that you're going to be doing in the app, right? So when we decouple it, right, when I have something called, let's say, authentication, when I divide it into authentication, to-dos, and settings. So those are going to be 3 folders we're going to be having to decouple the things we're going to have, right? Later, if you have something else, you can also add it, right? But for now, let's just have 3 folders, right? Authentication, to-dos, and settings. And here, something I like a lot is like I put the view with the view model, like always, right? So let's say you will have authentication view, right? And then authentication view model, right? So this is key for me, right? Because usually whenever I'm working in the view, so usually what I do is like view is like very simple, it's very simple views, right? So you're not doing any logic or anything in view. And in the view model, you're also not calling any API or doing some heavy logic, right? In the view model will be the logic for the view. Ideally, you have the view, which is very dumb, doesn't do any logic. It's just presenting things on the screen. And then you have a view model, which basically, it's the logic, but presentation logic, right? So let's say, oh, should this view show right now? Should we show an error now? Should we show this other view? If we're searching, that variable should be in the view model, the variable that, keeps track of whatever we're searching, things like that, right? So whenever you're working on a view, you're also working in the view model, usually by default, right? You're like, if you're touching the view, you're touching the view model. If you're touching the view model, chances are you're also touching the view. So those go together so you can easily find them. So let's say we have authentication. Yeah, inside of that, we can have authentication view model. And the same thing, right? We'll have a folder for to-dos. Once you go to those to-dos, then you can have, let's say, to-dos, maybe home view or home view model and things like that. And then settings view model will be like inside of here. And as you have more sections in the app and more functionality, you can decouple everything into nice folders and nice files so that they go together. And remember, this is not about having pretty folders. This is just about decoupling everything so that you have everything organized. Code-wise, you also have to decouple everything and so that everything, fits really neatly. But some people overlook the organization of the files and folders and then it becomes unmaintainable. So this is kind of like how I want you to do this so that you keep everything clean as the project grows, right? Because at the very beginning, you might not see the value, but as the project grows, the value actually grows, right? And then, so yeah, here you can have 2, 3, 5, 75, right? Depending on how many things you have, so you can navigate through your project. And then I usually like to have something called UI components. So inside UI components, I just have like, like sub views, right? That are going to be reusable. That's very important. So it's not just whatever view, it's like sub views that we're going to be reusing through our app. So we don't want to put it inside authentication because we want to reuse it. We might use it as well inside to-dos. We want to use it as well inside settings. So for example, error view. So you might have a view that looks very nice for an error, a custom view, right? And that error, you might want to show it in the authentication view, but you might want to show it in the to-dos view or in the settings view and anywhere in the app, right? So you basically do that. So a to-do compact view, that's that view that we extracted, right? That we can use in different, scenarios and different parts of the app. So we can also use it. So, these views don't really have a view model, right? Because they're not like the main view. They're just like very small views that we can reuse. We give it a couple values and we can reuse them throughout the entire app. So those will go into the UI components, right? Right. So now let's move on to domain. So domain will be, right. So instead of just declaring your data models and, in your view model, let's say you need a to-do, you're not going to do that in the to-dos view model. Or let's say you need a user, you're not going to do that inside the authentication view model. So basically you have another folder, right? In your main stack of folders, and you're going to call it domain. And inside that domain, we're going to have all our data models basically. So yeah, we need a user, we'll do app user. We need a to-do, we need to know what a to-do is. We do our data model for to-do, and same thing for to-do list, right? So all those data models that we need, we're going to put them inside domain, right? Right. So then we're also going to have services. So services are things like, for example, in this app, we could be using Firebase, right? So let's say we're using Firebase authentication, right? To be able to log in, sign up and things like that. So Firebase, if you guys don't know, it's a backend service from Google. So you can have, you have authentication services. You can have, databases like Firestore database and things like that, right? So let's say for an app like these, we could be using 2 services, right? From Firebase. We could be using Firebase authentication service and Firebase Firestore service. So let's say authentication talks to authentication, so to be able to log in, sign up, and things like that. And Firebase Firestore is just a database, right? To be able to put things in the database, retrieve things in the database, do queries, and things like that. So services are pure services. And what I mean by that are things like, let's say this talks directly to Firebase, right? And let's say you have another one for analytics, right? So that'll be Firebase Analytics Service. Let's say you have another one because a to-do list app, but you also show a weather thing, right? So you have a weather from, it's for a service for that weather thing that you're doing, right? So all of those are going to be inside services. So, in order to have it like these, I'm kind of like forcing you, right, to decouple things, right? Because you could technically have, right, if you don't have a decouple, you could have authentication logic here in the authentication view model, right? So you might be tempted to do, yeah, so in the authentication view model, you can have a function that says sign up. And then from there, you can call Firebase, right? Firebase authentication and sign their user up. But you're not supposed to do that, right? In order to make it scalable, you need to decouple everything. So the view model should only have logic for the view, right? Just presentation logic. So the view model should go to somewhere else, right? Somewhere else to actually, the view model shouldn't even know that we're using Firebase, right? It should just go to whatever authentication service, right? And then we say authentication service, which is our authentication service, and we do that sign up. And that's the one that knows that we use Firebase. We'll reach out to Firebase, we'll go back and we'll reach out back to the view model, right? So yeah, services are just the pure ones, right? So if we're using Firebase, we're using Firebase, right? We're going to have a Firebase service. But let's say we have this Firebase Firestore service for our database in Firebase, but let's say we also use another database somewhere else. Well, that's easy, right? We'll have another service, right here, and that'll be for the other database, right? It'll be like, I don't know, like another, this will be like custom database service, whatever, right? So you could have things like that. And you might be like, hey, and then if I have two databases, let's say for whatever reason, right? I want to have two and the two of them are going to have the same data because whatever reason, right? So how do we know, right? So from the view model, do I just call this Firebase Firestore or custom database service? No, we don't do that. So that's why we have a concept for stores, right? So the store will be something in the middle. So the view model will communicate to the store, right? In this case will be to authentication store. So the view model will communicate to authentication store. And then the authentication store, so all the view model knows is that we have an authentication store. It doesn't know that we use Firebase or a custom database or whatever. So, and the same thing, right, for the to-do store, right? Which will be this one where we store the to-dos and all that. So let's say you call the authentication store or the to-do store. That store is the one that's going to know where to reach out and what services to use. So the store will use the services, right? So let's say you're gonna sign up a user, right? That you do in the view model, you do authentication store, that sign up, right? And then in the authentication store, you would do, you reach out to Firebase auth service and sign up the user. Maybe you'll reach out to Firebase Firestore service and create a user with the email and the name, first name, last name, and all that information that you get from the user, date of birth, and things like that. So that information doesn't get stored in auth because auth is all about like email, password, and things like that. So maybe the authentication store in that function reaches out to this service, reaches out to this service. Maybe we're doing something else here. It does that too. If we have an analytics service, it'll reach out to that too to say, hey, we successfully signed in or signed up, things like that, right? That's why we have the store will be like the main thing for the logic, right? And then the store will use the services, right? That whatever services we're using, it might use 1, it might use 3, or it might use 25, right? And then the view model doesn't know about the services individually. It will basically only know that we have a store that handles all of that, right? Right, so let's get rid of these. Right, so it's very important you have services, and then within services, you put them all there, right? You don't just call these things from the view model right here, because that would just be like way more confusing and unmaintainable, right, in the long run. And then in the stores, yeah, again, you can have a store per big functionality. Like you can have a folder for authentication, a folder for to do, and yes, you can just have one file and then one authentication store and one to do store. But what I like to do in order to use dependency injection and to have, you know, more flexibility, what I like to do is I create a protocol, right, to do store protocol with all the things that the store need to have. And then I create this one, I call it live, right? And that I do it for like every single store usually. So the live one is the one we use in production, right? That's the one we actually use, that has, you know, that actually does, you know, goes to the database, call all these services and things like that. And then let's say you can have, and these conforms this to do store protocol, right? And then you can do as many as you want, right? So you can also create, for example, this one to do store mock. So that one, instead of going to the database and retrieving, you know, all the to-dos from the database, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna return some mock data, right? So for example, we can use that in the previews, right? So in the previews, we're, you know, in order to show all the to-dos, you don't need to actually make a call, right? And, you know, go to the actual database and get anything. You can just use it to do store mock, right? And then basically with that, you know, you get, it'll return mock data. It'll be really fast and you can use it in the preview. So the actual type of the store will be the protocol. That way you can replace, you can use any of these two. So you can use either this one or this one. In the previews, we raise for this one, and in the app, we raise to live, right? And then again, you can create 10 more if you want. Maybe you can create one for a slow network when you want to try things out for like unit tested or things. So, you know, you can do it as you would like, but this is a very good architecture, right? It's basically model view model, but we have this layer for services and stores, but we don't use the services directly. We do it through stores, and that way we have more flexibility, right? And then lastly, we have extensions. So for extensions, yeah, anything you want to do, let's say you want to like convert like an into string, or you want to like a date, you want to format it in a certain way, or let's say the task from Swift UI, from Swift, you want to like make it so that it handles errors as well. Anything you're going to do like that, I recommend it instead of just doing it, let's say in the view model, or, you know, instead of just doing it here, like in the authentication view model, for example, you make it an extension, right? So make it an extension. That way you can reuse it really neatly and you don't have it just, you know, in a file that you don't even know where it is. So go to extensions. You know, if you need to do something with strings, make it as an extension. If you do something with tasks or anything else, literally anything, just make it an extension. And then from there, you can work with it very nicely, right? So what I usually do is like any extensions related to view, right? To Swift UI views, I have a folder called view. And then from there, I can just have, you know, view plus colors, view plus hide keyboard on tab. So, you know, for colors, you know, of course, anything related to it, I'll put it here. This will be, let's say, an extension, a nice modifier in Swift UI to hide the keyboard on tap, right? When you tap on a view, you hide the keyboard, you'll have it here. And then here, you usually have like 20, 30, like as many as you want. They'll all be here, organized here. And then anything that's not related to view, then you'll have them here. Of course, if you have 25 extensions for dates because you're doing a calendar or something and you need that, you know, and then you need to decouple that out too, you can create a folder, right? Date, and then have like 7 extensions for date. If not, you know, if it's just a single, like 1 or 2 that you're using for like something, you can just have it in a file, like separate, right? So extensions for string, for tasks, and for things like that, right? And then again, if you're doing extensions for, let's say in this case, for Firebase, for data models, in Firebase, you can create a folder called Firebase, and then maybe in there you have query from Firebase, you have extensions to data models that are, you know, particularly for Firebase, right? So I think this is, you know, this is great. This is pretty good. I usually call it CDS, right? Core Domain Services Architecture. And it's basically a model view model with services and stores, and then just an easy way to organize your Xcode and your project, and, you know, all the dependencies and all the boundaries so that you know where to put things. And then as you have more components and more files and way more files and views and model and view models, you're gonna see the value of these, and the value will increase as the app gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So before you do any app, before you develop any app, make sure you go through these. Maybe if you're using Viper or any other architecture, it might vary a little bit, but just make sure you go through these before you actually start coding, so that everything will go through very nicely. And then as the app grows, because sometimes it might be too late, or not too late, but then you might get lazy because you have so many files and so many things, and at that point you want to refactor, but it's too much, right? And you don't feel like it, so it's just better from the start of it, right? From even before starting a single line of code, you create your folders, you create your things, and as you build things, you build it in an organized way and maintainable way, right? As a senior, right? So if you like this video, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.